Our classrooms may not be that racially diverse, but there are physical, gender, psychological, sociological, and theological diversities that we hardly notice. These diversities have the potential to stifle learning and even lead to chaos. A lady from a different culture was teaching in one of the schools in Kenya, and she was teaching a predominantly male class. She gave them some work to do and wanted to motivate them that they can do the work like any American teacher could do. She said, and now listen, predominantly male class, Africans. She said, yes, boys, you can do it. Why are you shocked? There was a deafening silence. The men were furious that a woman could call them boys. Does she know what I went through to become a man? And this was the question from a Maasai Moran. Actually, that incident interrupted learning for a couple of weeks until a replacement lecturer was found. In another situation, I was just in my early 30s and I was made to supervise a lady that was in her mid-50s. And she said, I will not let any boy look at my work. And it became a chaos, a crisis that Professor Cole literally had to handle at that time. So we see a lot of these stories in our classes. So when you enter the classroom and with such a diversity, do you notice it? Or you just see a straight class? I enter the classroom and the first thing I look for is the handedness. Most of our, if not all of our tables that we have, those with those little things are all right-handed. Disabled access. So these are some of the diversities we are talking about when we talk into classroom diversity. And this, I'm going to invite one of our senior colleagues who has taught all over the world in many classroom situations and see what her experiences about diversity would be like. Yes, Stephanie, just a couple of minutes to do that. And then I will turn you over to...
Good morning. I'm Stephanie Black. I'm here representing Theologians Without Borders, but I do also teach New Testament, hermeneutics, and Greek in Africa, Asia, and North America. I'm going to tell you a couple of Asia stories because I don't want to step on any African toes here. So in January, I was teaching a master's MDiv level course in hermeneutics online for a very well-established school in Asia. We had just gotten, so it's an intensive course. Every session, 3 hours, is big. And we were just about to get to the most important session of the course. It was hermeneutics, so we had been talking about hermeneutics, our approaches, our theories, our understanding, and we were going to workshop biblical studies articles from scholars from their country. So very, very important in terms of skills learning. I found out the night before that all of the female students, and there were about 8 in this class of 26, all of the female students were required to miss the next 2 days of classes in order to attend a women's seminar that the seminary was hosting for the community. The men were not required to miss, only the women were required to miss. And in their education, this would be one of the most significant couple of days. Well, you can imagine how I felt about this. I only had one round of emails I could do because of the time zone difference, and I wasn't there in person. But I know the institution, and I know that the academic dean is very proactive about women's development. That dean was on sabbatical, so I suspected somebody in the scheduling office made an unfortunate decision. So I wrote an email saying, oh, I'm so confused. There must be a misunderstanding. I heard that the female students were going to be required to miss hermeneutics class when we did the most important contextual hermeneutics of their biblical studies program. Obviously, this is a mistake. Because if it were not a mistake, it would be gender discrimination. And you know I couldn't support that. Besides, I think it's illegal in your country. And so I sent it off and I sent it back. And of course, no, it was a terrible mistake. It was a terrible misunderstanding. They didn't say mistake, misunderstanding. And so what they actually did was they sent all the students to my class. It was meant to be 2 days that they missed. All the students were in my class the next day, but they made all the students, both women and men, miss the next day of class for the women's conference. So I thought, yes, and you know where I'm talking about. So, it's just one of those times where as a teacher, you can kind of facilitate that. That was a challenging story. A much more rewarding story about 15 years ago, maybe 18, also in a well-established seminary in Asia, teaching hermeneutics, this time at MTH level, about 8 students in the class, but only 1 female student. She always sat a little bit off to the side, and she was a little bit quiet, and the guys ignored her. But I started to realize through her very quiet answers that she was actually quite able. So I started spending more time with her, allowing her a longer period of time to speak in class. I would say to the guys, okay, hold on a second, I want to hear what so-and-so has to say. And they're like, well, why should she get special treatment? Well, she had told me that throughout her undergraduate program and her postgraduate program, she had never had a female instructor, ever. I was the first one. And I said to the guys, I want you to imagine for a minute, if through your entire theological education, your degree program, and now your master's, you had only ever had women instructors. How would that feel to you? And they're like, whoa, that's weird. So, they kind of got it, and I ended up spending more time with this young woman outside of class. We became friends over the next 5 to 8 years. She was off teaching in a smaller regional Bible college. Eventually, she was brought back to this big seminary and made a program director for their research institute. She then has gone on to do her PhD, just finishing, and she's now the program director for their online MA. But just to encourage and to draw out somebody who had never had somebody to say, I see you, in class before. So.
Thank you so much. We let Stephanie share those stories because we'll be coming at a point where we say, how do you deal with diversity in your classroom? Now I invite my colleague, actually, he's my pastor. I call him Pastor Paul Clark. When I have those difficult things in the office, I will be the first person to call, and he has always been very gracious. Paul, we are all yours. May the Lord bless you all. Thank you.
Diversity comes in various forms. And that is an expression of the creativity of God. Sitting at breakfast this morning, we were joking about how the Tower of Babel is a problem. It's created a huge problem for us of language. But part of the diversity that we have to deal with is actually the expression of God at work. So as we consider the impact of diversity on theological education institutions, seminaries, universities, Bible colleges, institutes, there's a key area of practical importance for our consideration. The classroom. The examples that you've heard, the stories you've heard, you could probably add dozens of stories of your own of how the effect of diversity, how diversity has affected your teaching in the classroom. Why is it so important for us to pause and reflect on the effect of diversity in the classroom? The classroom is where 2 of the primary populations of a seminary encounter each other. Faculty and students. One of those is the reason you exist. The other is a key element in working towards why you exist. Now, you figure out which is which. But the interest in this encounter, in this place that we call the classroom, the interest is learning. The purpose of gathering faculty and students into a location where there is an encounter that is the teaching and learning encounter, that gathering together is purposeful for learning. But not just any kind of learning. Because it is theological education, it is not just mastery of content. It is life change. It is the shaping of character. It is the shaping of ways of thinking. It is the shaping and reshaping, the redemptive reshaping of culture for the sake of God's people to be a countercultural people living in a world that has gone crazy. You see, our purpose in gathering together in the classroom is far larger than just an encounter of people to learn something. And so that question of diversity is important for us to remember and to be able to take advantage of for the sake of our purpose in the classroom. Now, the classroom is not the only place that learning takes place. The classroom is not the only place where we promote that kind of encounter that causes change in the life of our students. But it is the one place where we schedule that to happen. It is the one place where, as institutions, we do have an element of control, of being able to shape that encounter. So as we think of diversity in the classroom, it's not just a diversity of people. It's not just a diversity of types of people. It's a diversity of learning. There are all sorts of learning that we plan and hope will occur. Not just the learning of the content of scriptures and theology, but the learning of the principles and practices of ministry in its multifaceted forms. The learning that will transform the mind, the heart, the character. The learning that will give capacity for dealing with an ever-changing world. Not bringing the answers from 1920 into 2020s, but allowing the way that the thinking was shaped in 1920 be shaping the way we think about the reality of 2024. Or even questioning whether they were thinking properly about their own time. And allowing us to bring a critical view of how should we think theologically about our times. How should we think theologically to bring ministry to bear in a relevant way into our world? So our classroom encounters are an expression of diversity of learning, of learning aims of theological education. So it's not just faculty and learners where we have diversity, male and female faculties, not just a diversity of purposes, but there is a diversity of diversities. And they have an effect on the learning in the classroom. And that creates a pile of challenges. Hold it, you say. I'm not prepared to deal with all of that diversity in my classroom. Well, I wasn't either. But I did learn that as God brought us together within the classroom, He had a redemptive purpose that He was working towards. And I had to adjust my thinking from my content to what God wanted to do through the content, through the process of learning, in the redemptive purpose that He had for that encounter. When I say redemptive, what do I mean? Bringing value into a situation where there has been brokenness. And this whole question of diversity creates for us an awareness of the brokenness of our world, of our society. And if God wants to bring about His redemptive purposes, we must be willing to confront what we become aware of. Over these last 36 hours, you've been exposed to statistics. You've been exposed to experiences. You have been discussing together. We together have been raising our awareness of what is going on. Prof. Victor and your wife, Toyin, thank you for sharing a historical perspective that gives us a little bit longer view of what is taking place. I came out of that time yesterday morning celebrating. Hallelujah, we have made progress. We heard it again this morning as our sister Esther was sharing of, when I did my first program, I was the only female student. My second, I was the only female. My third, my fourth. Today, that's not the same. But because it's not the same, we must be willing to address how having a diverse classroom changes the dynamic of learning. It's important for us to recognize how the questions of gender in our culture impact our classrooms. How the effect of the differences between men and women, and some of those may be role expectations that have been forced on us by our culture, trained into us, built into us by our culture. But some of those are innate differences that God built into us in His creativity. The diversity that comes between when we have men and women studying together is a diversity of perspective because God has given us different eyes to look at the world. And it's not that one is better than the other. It's not that one is superior than the other. But oftentimes, we do not value what is different than what we are. I'd like to pause for a brief exercise. And I'm going to ask you just to pair up where you are. You have somebody sitting by your side, and if it happens that you're an odd number in your row, well, then it'll be 3 of you. Okay? Simple exercise. Take a piece of paper and begin to write, or your phone or your computer, and begin to list. I want to take, in pairs, I'd like you to list as many different kinds of diversity that you can think of in classrooms. And I'll give you 2 hints. One is diversity of gender, male and female, men and women, okay? And the second one is diversity of educational backgrounds. Now, you already have 2 to get started with, so now you have 5 minutes in pairs to list as many kinds of diversity as you can that happen in classrooms. Go. I'll bet you never thought about the kind of diversities that you face in the learning setting of a classroom. And we haven't even begun to think about what is the effect of that on learning and teaching. Who's going to be the spokesman for the group that is still standing? Lulu, come this way so that we can give you a mic. Oh, you had 30, 33. Whoops. Uh-oh, we're in a tough competition here. And it's 2 South Africans. Okay, let's flip for this one. What I'm gonna do is, no, Lulu Yumpies, come on up. Come on up. We want you to be able to share the list, and JJ is going to try to write out some of that so that you all can see it.
Okay. I'll speak slowly. Disclaimer. There are close relationships between them, but we thought that they were unique issues of diversity. I hear the murmurs. I'm ready for them. Okay.
True professor.
Oh, thanks. Gender. Educational background.
Those were the 2 givens.
Yes. Freebies, we all had them. Faith and religion, so we thought those were closely related concepts. Family, and we did differentiate some things from this because we thought they impacted how people think in the classroom, so I'll come back to that one later. Age, ethnicity.
Now, you can be crossing off the ones that are on your list as you hear.
Nationality. For lack of a better word, race. Class. Class.
Meaning social class?
Yes.
Socioeconomic
And then
class?
economic class, so those were slightly different things. Vocation. So another one after that, economic status or situation. So 11 could be economic status. Vocation before or after being in the classroom.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's number 12. Vocation. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I missed that. Purpose or calling. Purpose or calling, we discussed very briefly, were separate things.
So when we come back to the word vocation, theologically we define that as calling, but socially vocation relates to occupation and work.
All right.
Many discussions I see to be had. Right, where am I? Health, physical health, or mental health, but health was an overall category. Ability or disability, or varying abilities.
Disability. Yes. Go on, make a second column. Disability.
Next, geography.
Next, geography.
Oh, no, next, sorry, is geography or distance from the classroom. Denominational affiliation. Academic leaning or discipline. yeah, or
Field.
gifting, yeah, academic gifting. Language. Hobbies.
Hobbies.
Like things you do in your pleasure time.
Uh-huh.
Spiritual gifting. Squeezing it out. Maturity. Personality. Critical thinking capacity. Political affiliation.
Ooh.
History of stigmatization. Learning style. Learning speed. Ready? All the ones that start with learning now. No. Marital status. I feel like that one we might have to combine with family. Okay, marital status. Okay, there's popular support for that being an identified item. Food preference. Food preference or dietary requirements.
And you were joking, Caswell.
Did you have that too? Fashion. Birth order and then values. Birth order. Number of birth order where you sit in your family hierarchy. And then values before I get shot. Goodbye, thank you.
Wow. Values. Now, I'm curious, as you were listening to Lulu share the list from her group, and Cornelia, did you have one or two to add to that? Because you were also right up there close by. Okay, any others that you had that weren't listed already? Go ahead, Bukola. Temperament. Personality. Personality was up here, but we could put temperament alongside of that. Okay, Merdad. Access to technology. Oh,
That was ours.
Cornelia.
Okay, so we're going to add to that one technological ability or literacy.
Okay.
And then there's the urban city distinction. Teaching styles. Oh, sorry, we're going. Oh, yeah, urban rural, not urban city. Teaching styles. So not just learning styles. Thank you for bringing that one up. And then theological leanings or convictions. So even within Christianity and specific denominations.
Can I add community status?
Appearance, tall, short, fast, but also vision.
Vision. Sighted. Sighted or...
Vision, like the vision of each.
Okay.
in the
World
Christ.
vision.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. We could keep going. Now, if you, in your classroom, here's a question I want to ask you. In your classroom, if if a short boy is picked on by a tall boy, how do you treat that? How do you treat it? What tools do you use? Okay? If a slow learner is picked on by a fast learner, criticized, ridiculed because they're slow, how do you deal with that within the classroom? These are expressions of bias, expressions of how we deal with somebody who is different than we are. And each one of these diversities, we must have the tools, the mechanisms to be able to deal with, to address when there is a conflict because of a difference that creates a discrimination, that creates an interaction that is negative, that creates a way that does not work towards our purpose of learning, of God's redemptive purpose within the classroom. So, my question to you is, pause and think for a moment. What would be different in dealing with the question of gender in terms of the tools that we have or don't have to address that? I'm asking a question because I want us to reflect about, as we move towards the discussion of pastoral care in situations, as we move towards how do we work with policy, this is not just a matter of going, oh, we just need to decide this is how we're going to handle it, boom, 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 and it's all resolved. Because all of these issues of differences, of diversity within the classroom, are diversities within our society, diversities within churches, diversities within our staff at the seminary. And if we are in the business of equipping and forming those who will lead the church, we need to help them gain the tools to help work with the differences. So we need to think about our own tools so that we can help them gain the tools they will need. Do you catch my logic? We've moved from story to thinking about our reality, and now there's the question. And I'm going to ask my brother JJ to come back up and help us think a little bit. I had no idea how this exercise was going to go, and it actually took more time for us to get through it. So we're going to try to speed up our pace because we have about 12 minutes to finish. But I think you catch the importance of what are the tools to be able to address this within the classroom. JJ?
Thank you so much, Paul. I didn't also think it will go this to this extent. We talk of diversity, but the diversity of the diversity is there. So now, well, there are several tools that we have in our hands, and some we do not even have. So now we are going to look at those diversities, perhaps not all of them, but the ones that you have, about two or three of them. How do you handle them? Policy, good pedagogical practice, disciplinary committee, reliance on the larger culture. Which one? Can we address that now? This is just a starter for you to say, how do we handle these things and how do we start to think about them? So what I'll do here is I'm going to take only 4 responses.
We added one more down here, counseling and pastoral care as one of the responses.
Okay.
And so we said some of the spiritual matters and disciplinary matters will go to pastoral care and counseling.
Like which one there?
Family-related matters.
Family-related matters will go to the counselor.
Pastoral and counseling care.
All right, thank you. And no, just one from a group, please. Thank you. Let's go to the other group because we don't want to take the time for, pass it to the other group.
I think educational background, good pedagogy will help with that.
Thank you very much. Educational background, good pedagogy will help with that. So, again, we are starting to discuss these things in how do we harness? What tools can we use? And oftentimes, what actually goes to the discipline committee is just about good pedagogical practices. All right? Campus, that's just the way things are. Campus practice. So, but I want to ask the question, what is the, I don't want to call it meta framework, but I would still call it, what would be the meta framework for you to handle diversity in the classroom? Policy would be the meta framework, okay? Openness. Pedagogy. May we pose it to you that the meta framework for handling diversity within the classroom, Paul, would be what?
We are all made in the image of God.
Thank you. When there is diversity, you look at that individual short, you look at that individual tall, you look at this individual black, you look at this individual white. The theoretical or perhaps the theological framework is we are all created in the image of God. And that is the meta framework. So when I stand before my students, who do I see? People created in the image of God. Yes, Paul? The pastoral voice on this.
Would like to just suggest a couple of things as we finish. 3 areas of addressing diversity in the classroom. First, perceive the effect of gender diversity and other diversities in the classroom on the learning dynamics. Just begin to perceive that they have an effect on learning. Secondly, prepare examples of gender diversity in the teaching materials. Begin to think, how can I include examples that show women in my teaching, in my content? Set the stage for healthy cross-gender relationships in the learning context. There are times that we need to promote men and women talking to each other within the classroom about the learning content that is going on as part of the learning process, to help create that awareness of how each other thinks, to create the awareness of how we learn, to create an open and create the opportunity for openness to occur as we are learning. We can respond at different levels. And as I've been listening these last 2 days, I've been struck by something. The elements of what we are discussing here in terms of the challenges of gender diversity in theological education, many of them are cultural. And the foundations of culture come in family. We spoke of the family background. How many did we hear? My mother was an example to me of somebody who, we've heard how that example has set our culture within us. Our society, our schooling experiences, our neighborhoods, our community that we grow, those all establish our culture. And culture has a way of maintaining status quo. It has a mechanism built into it to maintain status quo, which means if God is going to bring about change, it takes intentional effort to change. But I want to give a caution. Culture is not changed by edict. That would be policy or prescriptions. Culture is changed by practices that become patterns. And practices begin by taking the choice. I am going to do it this way. And then I am going to continue to do it this way so that the practice becomes established, and then it becomes a pattern, and then it begins to change the culture. But it begins with the choice to act. Teachers at the classroom level, developing patterns and practices within the classroom for those relationships across the differences. Administrators in their responses, whether it be, this is what the policy says, here's the practice that needs to go along with that and the pattern that we would like to see develop. Governance reinforcing mission and diversity through policy. And there's where governance and chief administrators have a way of being able to see the role of policy to shape the direction in areas where they do have control. One of those that Verena mentioned yesterday was hiring practice. Other areas that we see relate to those institutional areas where a policy can be established to say, this is what our culture is going to be. But we can't just across the board establish culture by edict. We must develop patterns and practices to do that. Summary. Diversity exists in the classroom. Are we agreed? I think we saw that. The classroom is the foundational place to treat the challenges of diversity. That's where we develop the practices and patterns. Everyone must embrace diversity in actions that support the learning process towards the mission that God has given us, which is a redemptive mission, bringing value where there is brokenness. May God help us to be his instruments in the midst of our broken world. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And as a takeaway, I would always like my students to write their educational philosophy. And after this, when I dealt with this session, I went back and I made a statement on gender as an educational philosophy. You have to write it, and it becomes the basis upon which you engage the students in the classroom.